Jade stood at the back of the long gallery with her hands folded over each other so no one could see them shake, while every member of staff at Halverton Hall faced the front table where the quarterly assembly was never supposed to contain surprises. The table held the polished ledger, the tea tray, the attendance sheet, and beside them, a sealed cream folder with the estate crest stamped in blue wax. Lenora Pike kept one gloved hand on that folder as if it belonged to her already. Iris Cole broke the seal with a letter opener that caught the light. She read in a voice so even it made the room go still, confirming trustee authority, confirming residency compliance, confirming immediate operational review, while Jade heard each phrase as if it were part of someone else's life. George Fletcher stood along the side wall in the same dark coat he wore in the East Wing corridors, hands loose at his sides, expression unchanged. Lenora turned halfway toward him with practiced patience and said the hall had already been inspected through proper channels, with no need for disruption from archive guests who misunderstood domestic protocol. Her smile was polished enough to pass for courtesy from a distance. Jade had seen that smile before every shift change where someone lost hours without explanation. Iris looked up from the document and delivered one sentence that rearranged every face in the room. Mr. George Fletcher is the sole trustee and resident owner of Halverton Hall. No one spoke for a breath, and Jade felt her pulse move into her throat as memories of damp plaster, folded linens, quiet corridor conversations, and one cup of tea left outside room 18 lined up in a new order she had no time to process. George did not step forward quickly. He crossed the floor at an ordinary pace, accepted the folder from Iris, and thanked her in the same low tone he used when he asked where extra blankets were kept. Lenora's posture tightened. She began to object, citing staffing strain and established management structures, while George opened a second set of papers and placed one sheet flat on the table between them. Inventory discrepancies totaling $12,460, he said, matched against laundry logs and purchase orders. He glanced toward Thomas Ruiz, who was already standing. "We are done with this." Jade saw the escort enter from the side door, because Iris had arranged everything before the meeting started. Lenora did not shout. She tried to retain control through composure, asked for private review, asked for delay, asked for a familiar process that had always protected her. George answered that termination for cause was effective immediately under trustee authority, and Iris added that withheld wages would be corrected under estate employment policy before the week ended. The moment should have felt loud, but what Jade heard most clearly was George's earlier voice in an unheated corridor saying almost casually, "Room 18 is warmer than the rest." At the time, she thought he meant the radiator. Standing in the gallery, she understood he had meant her. 3 years earlier, in the spring of 2023, Jade arrived at Halverton Hall with one suitcase, one pair of work shoes wrapped in a grocery bag, and a letter from the village doctor confirming her mother's death certificate had been processed. She did not bring flowers from the service because there had not been enough money for flowers. She brought the letter because forms asked for reasons, and reasons kept doors open when grief did not. The hall itself held 64 rooms, 2 staircases that visitors used, 3 that visitors never noticed, and enough polished surfaces to make every corridor seem occupied even when it was empty. Lenora Pike interviewed her in the linen office with the window shut against fresh air, reviewed her references, and marked her as temporary staff under probationary terms. Jade accepted without negotiation because temporary still meant paid hours. In those first months, housekeeping had 14 workers split across floors and shift rotations. Jade learned where each cart squeaked, which guest rooms had stubborn locks, and how to fold old cotton sheets so worn, edges stayed hidden at the mattress seam. She kept count of teacups because breakage got blamed on whoever touched the trolley last. She worked quietly enough that supervisors forgot she was new. Her mother had taught her to clean as if someone tired would notice, not as if someone strict would inspect, and that rule stayed in her hands even when her chest hurt from carrying buckets up 3 flights. She lined shoes by doors so guests would not trip at night. She left extra towels in rooms booked for families who travelled with small children. These choices were never requested, and no one wrote them into performance notes. By late summer, Lenora began reducing hours without warning. One housekeeper left for a nursing home position. Another took a bakery job in town with steadier mornings. Replacement requests sat unanswered. By the time early autumn arrived in 2026, the housekeeping roster had fallen from 14 to 8, and the East Wing carried a red mark on the staffing board labelled closed until further notice. Jade would later see in Lenora's rota edits that the mark stayed by design, controlled neglect disguised as necessity. Closed did not mean sealed. Closed meant neglected, which created a smell Jade noticed every time she passed the eastern corridor door with fresh linen for the west suites. Dust in unused places behaved like weather. It settled in one pattern until a draft shifted and exposed where no one had cared enough to return. She saw it, logged it mentally, kept walking because her assigned list already overran her shift. She was paid $17 an hour, temporary rate, reviewed every quarter and never moved forward. Permanent status would have increased her pay by $2 an hour, and she knew this because she had copied the employment policy by hand into a notebook during lunch breaks, trying to understand why the review boxes on her file never progressed past pending. Lenora explained each delay with patient annoyance, saying paperwork had timing issues, saying the trust office had priorities, saying Jade should be grateful to remain on schedule while others lost days. Gratitude became part of the wage. Jade learned to nod once, accept the next task sheet, and keep her face neutral. Asking again did not produce answers, it produced fewer meal vouchers. When the notice came that an archive guest had been approved for 2 weeks in early autumn, everyone assumed he would be assigned a West Wing room near the library office. Lenora received a signed instruction from Trust Administration, placing him in East Wing Room 18, with access to storage records and old architectural plans. She read it twice, made a sound through her nose, and pinned it to the board without comment. Only after the assembly did Jade understand the placement had been his choice, because the unused wing let him see who still treated unseen spaces and unseen people with care. No one volunteered to prepare the room because no one had the hours. The East Wing sat outside the daily rotation for nearly 6 months. Carpets needed beating, radiators needed bleeding, and 2 windows in room 18 leaked cold through cracked putty. Lenora said the guest had requested minimal service and could manage with what was available, and Jade later found that request entered under Lenora's own initials. She assigned Jade an extra west hallway instead. Jade finished her listed rooms near dusk, returned supplies to the closet, and stood in front of the board while the hallway emptied. She could feel the familiar arithmetic of risk in her shoulders. If she stayed late without authorization, she might be written up. If she left room 18 untouched, the guest would sleep in stale air and damp sheets. She took 1 clean set of linens, 1 blanket, and the portable heater from maintenance, signed it out in her own name, and walked east. Room 18 looked abandoned in the way expensive places do, with good wood hidden beneath neglect. Dust filmed every flat surface. The radiator clanged once and gave no heat. She opened the windows just long enough to clear the smell, wiped the sill, remade the bed twice because the first fitted sheet had gone brittle at one corner, and set the heater where it would warm the room without scorching the old rug. Her shift ended 40 minutes earlier. She kept working. At the end, she left 2 folded towels, 1 jug of boiled water, and a note in plain handwriting that said, "Heat may take time. Call extension 3 if you need extra blankets." She did not sign her full name, only J, because staff were told not to encourage guest familiarity. She closed the door quietly and returned the corridor key before Lenora left the office. The next morning, George Fletcher was already in room 18 when she came with a vacuum and dust cloth, standing near the window with a stack of archive boxes open on a chair. He was dressed like someone who expected cold, dark wool, plain tie, boots that had seen rain. He stepped aside to let her pass and thanked her for warming the room. His voice carried no surprise, as if kindness were ordinary and worth acknowledging once. She answered that the radiator still needed maintenance, and she would ask Tomas Ruiz to inspect it. He nodded and glanced at the note she had left on the table. "You wrote this," he said. It was not a question. Jade said yes and resumed dusting because standing idle in a guest room invited comments later. He watched her straighten the warped picture frame above the fireplace, then asked how long the east wing had been closed. She told him the wing had 18 rooms, and no current cleaning rotation, only emergency checks after storms. He repeated the number softly, 18, as if measuring it against something else. She expected a complaint about standards or service gaps, yet he asked where staff records were kept and whether room closures were temporary or permanent entries in the log. Questions from ordinary guests usually stopped at towels and tea. These did not. When Jade returned to the service corridor, Lenora was waiting with crossed arms and a ledger under one elbow. "You used premium linen in a closed wing," she said, loud enough for the pantry maid to hear. Jade said the room had been damp, and the reserve set was unsuitable for guest use. Lenora opened the ledger, circled a line with her pen, and informed Jade that her shift meal voucher was docked for unauthorized supply expenditure. Jade felt hunger before noon that day, a dull, dragging ache under her ribs, while she changed bins and polished banisters. She did not appeal the docking because appeals were reviewed by Lenora. Thomas found her filling her bottle at the maintenance sink and passed her half his sandwich wrapped in wax paper without comment. She accepted and thanked him, chewing slowly so it would last through the afternoon. That evening, she submitted a maintenance request for room 18's radiator. Thomas signed it and went himself, came back with rust on his cuffs and said the valve had been deliberately tightened shut, not broken. He said it once and left it there because naming sabotage in a building run on appearances could cost both of them. Jade added the detail to her notebook under the date. Days passed in a pattern that kept folding George back into her shift. She cleaned room 18 each morning because no one else was assigned. He was usually present with papers spread across the desk, making lists in neat columns, asking for practical things in short sentences. Where were old uniform inventories stored? Who signed laundry dispatch sheets? When did staffing cuts begin? He listened as if each answer belonged to a larger map. Jade stayed careful. She answered what a guest could reasonably ask, avoided gossip, and kept her pace steady so no one could accuse her of lingering. Even so, she noticed he always moved her cart away from loose floorboards before she reached them. Always closed archive box lids when dust rose. Always thanked her with eye contact instead of looking past her shoulder for someone ranked higher. Courtesy from men in expensive coats often came with performance. His did not. Lenora increased pressure as soon as those encounters became visible. She reassigned Jade to split shifts with a 2-hour unpaid gap, forcing her to wait on site in a cold break room if she could not afford bus fare home and back. She added inspection notes for minor issues no one had flagged before, A misaligned soap dish, a towel folded left over right. Every correction carried the same message. Temporary staff were replaceable. One rainy Tuesday, Jade finished in the East Corridor and stopped outside the linen office because voices were raised inside. The door stood ajar by an inch where warped wood no longer fit the frame, and she waited to ask for disinfectant stock. Lenora was speaking to accounts clerk Martin Hale, who sounded uneasy. "She keeps filing for permanent status," Lenora said, papers rustling. "I marked each review incomplete. Temporary workers do not question schedules, and permanent ones start counting rights." Martin asked whether incomplete could stand for 3 years without trust approval. Lenora laughed softly. "Trust signs what I send. She is at 17 an hour and should be grateful. $2 more an hour multiplied across months turns a compliant girl into a cost center." Jade felt the disinfectant bottle slip against her palm and caught it before it hit the floor. She backed away without taking a breath until she reached the stairwell landing. She sat on the bottom step where no cameras reached, hands pressed between her knees to stop the tremor. Grief she thought she had placed carefully after her mother's death rose again with a sharper edge, not because money was everything, because someone had looked at her effort for 3 years and decided obedience was worth more than fairness. She wiped her face with her sleeve before anyone entered the stairwell. Lenora never saw her cry. After that afternoon, Jade stopped asking about her contract. She stopped trying to prove she deserved advancement through perfect corners and faster turnovers. She still did her work to standard because she refused to live untidily inside herself. Yet, a private line shifted. She began saving copies, dates, signatures, requisition slips, laundry counts, anything factual that did not require belief. Survival changed into record-keeping. George noticed the change in her without naming it. During one morning clean, he said she looked tired and asked whether staffing had dropped further. She answered that 8 housekeepers now covered what 14 once handled, and closed wings could conceal almost anything from routine checks. He asked who controlled supply ordering. She said Lenora approved all purchase requests above a small threshold and initialed returns personally. His pen paused over his notebook. He did not press for gossip. He asked for documents she could access legally in her role, laundry dispatch copies from East and West Wings, monthly detergent allocations, and room occupancy sheets already posted to staff. "Facts travel farther than complaints," he said, folding his notebook. She met his eyes for a second and saw no quick sympathy, only steadiness that made room for choice. Jade hesitated for 2 full shifts. Taking copies could be called theft of internal records. Refusing meant returning to a life where truth stayed in locked drawers, and people like Lenora wrote reality, one form at a time. Thomas found her in the service yard at dusk, staring at the laundry annex door. He did not ask for details. He said the old copier in maintenance still worked if the paper tray was nudged from the left. That night, she gathered what she could justify touching: duplicate dispatch logs, requisition forms with matching signatures, detergent purchase orders, linen replacement counts that exceeded recorded room occupancy by impossible margins. She copied each page once, returned originals in order, and stacked duplicates inside a plain envelope addressed only to G. Fletcher, room 18. Among the copies were closure sheets with East Wing checks struck through in Lenora's hand, proving the wing had been kept uncleaned as policy, not as accident. Her pulse stayed high until she slid the envelope under his door before sunrise. George was waiting in the corridor when she arrived with her cart. He held the envelope sealed, untorn. "If this puts you at risk, say so now," he said. Jade heard herself answer before fear could edit the sentence. She said risk had already happened. This only named it. He inclined his head and asked whether she trusted Iris Cole from the trust office, if formal review became necessary. Jade said she had never spoken to Iris directly. He told her the quarterly assembly was in 5 days and requested she bring no extra documents after today. He did not explain further. She spent those 5 days moving through routine tasks, with heightened quiet, stripping beds, polishing taps, restocking soaps, while every door click sounded like summons. Lenora watched her more closely, as if sensing movement in the structure she controlled without seeing where. On the 4th day, Lenora called Jade into the pantry and placed 2 forms on the table. One offered reduced guaranteed hours under seasonal efficiency. The other required acknowledgement that previous contract delays were administrative and unchallenged. Signing would erase any future claim. Jade read both forms carefully, set them down, and said she needed 24 hours to review. Lenora's smile thinned. "Temporary staff do not set terms," she said. Jade left without signing, carrying fear like a weight under her sternum. She could have yielded to preserve immediate wages. Choosing delay created a narrow chance for truth to arrive first. She walked to the east wing after shift change with 2 clean pillowcases and found room 18, door open. George stood by the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled once, sorting papers into 3 piles. He looked up when she entered and asked one question. "Did she ask you to sign anything today?" Jade described the forms. He listened without interruption and asked if she kept copies. She did. He said, "Bring them tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, to the gallery before staff arrive." The sentence was calm, almost procedural. She nodded once, placed fresh pillowcases on the chair, and left with the odd steadiness that comes when danger is acknowledged in plain language. Rain hit the hall windows overnight and did not stop by morning. Jade arrived early with damp cuffs, copies tucked in a folder beneath her apron. Thomas was in the gallery checking a wall light and gave her a brief nod toward the front table, where Iris Cole was arranging binders by tab color. Iris greeted Jade by name, accepted the forms, and asked whether she was willing to confirm authenticity if needed. Jade said yes. Her voice held. The assembly opened at 9. Staff lined benches by department. Lenora took her place at the front with the attendance ledger and began routine updates on occupancy, supply constraints, and compliance reminders. Iris waited until Lenora finished before requesting floor access under trust authority. The request was granted as a formality because no one expected the trust office to challenge domestic management in open session. Everything that followed returned Jade to the moment where this story began. The wax seal breaking, the sentence that named George, the balance of power shifting in a room built for hierarchy. She watched Lenora attempt control through procedure, watched it fail against documents that matched on date, signature, and quantity. Iris presented the chain clearly. Laundry logs copied by shift, purchase orders approved above actual need, inventory returns absent where records claimed credits. George did not raise his voice when he addressed Lenora. He stated that manipulation of records, deliberate suppression of Jade's permanent classification, and controlled neglect of the East Wing constituted cause for termination under estate policy and trust oversight. Iris confirmed wage correction terms, including retroactive adjustment for withheld permanent status differential over 18 months, calculated from Jade's documented hours. Jade had expected vindication to feel sharp. It arrived like air after being underwater too long. Lenora tried one final tactic. She turned toward Jade and asked whether this was personal revenge dressed as compliance, a temporary worker's resentment-seeking spectacle. Jade kept her hands folded and answered that records matched because numbers matched. She offered no speech about suffering, no accusation beyond what paper could carry. The restraint made Lenora's performance collapse faster than anger would have. Escort staff entered on Iris's signal. Lenora requested 10 minutes to collect personal effects and was granted supervised access to her office. Thomas accompanied the escort to inventory keys and secure storage rooms. His face stayed neutral, although Jade caught a brief release in his shoulders when Lenora surrendered the master ring. Structural cruelty often survives through keys. Losing them changed real things by lunchtime. Once the room settled, George moved to staffing corrections. He promoted Thomas Ruiz to operations manager effective immediately, citing maintenance reliability and documented cooperation during review. Thomas accepted with a short nod that held more relief than triumph. George announced interim payroll adjustments for all housekeeping staff affected by undocumented schedule cuts, followed by full policy audit within the quarter. Murmurs spread through the benches, cautious at first, then audible. Jade expected to be thanked and dismissed. George looked toward her and asked whether she would meet after the assembly in the old map room. She said yes, collected her folder, and returned to her tasks because beds still needed turning, and tea trays still had to reach occupied rooms before noon. Justice had arrived, but linen did not fold itself. The map room smelled faintly of leather and dust polish. George stood near a long table where 18th century survey sheets lay under glass. Iris was present with 2 documents and left after verifying signatures, closing the door behind her. Jade remained near the threshold until George invited her to sit. He did not circle the point. "I want you to take house steward," he said, sliding one document toward her. "Permanent appointment with authority over housekeeping standards and staffing recommendations." House steward had once been a position her mother spoke about, with a practical kind of respect, not glamorous, not easy, crucial to whether any large house functioned without exploiting the people who kept it standing. Jade read the contract line by line. Wage rate reflected the role, benefits were defined, grievance process rooted outside immediate supervisors, and probation terms could not be extended without written trust approval and employee countersignature. The loophole Lenora had used was closed on paper, and the file that had kept Jade temporary now sat on the side of the desk, waiting for her signature as the approving steward. She signed when she finished reading. George signed second. Iris returned briefly to witness and file copies, then withdrew again, leaving silence that felt different from their East Wing silences because concealment was gone. Jade looked at him directly and asked why he chose room 18 when the West suites were warmer and easier. He answered without ornament. Unseen places tell the truth about a house, and unseen people tell the truth about everyone in it. The sentence reached back through every morning she had worked in that cold corridor. Every time she adjusted a blanket no one thanked her for. Every risk she measured alone. She asked whether he had known from the first night. He said he noticed who restored a closed room after shift end and left heat for a stranger without expecting reward. He added that certainty came later when records mattered and she chose facts over fear. Practical matters filled the next week. Jade met each housekeeper individually, mapped current room loads, and rebuilt rotation to cover all occupied areas without hidden unpaid overtime. She restored East Wing basic checks with clear frequency, one deep clean cycle every 2 weeks across 18 rooms, emergency protocol after storms, and transparent supply sign out countersigned by supervisor and maintenance. She also processed pending status files, converting stalled temporary classifications under written policy, including her own, while Thomas installed new lockboxes for key control. Payroll corrections processed on Friday. Iris sent sealed statements showing back pay calculations under estate policy. Jade's packet included the 18-month differential based on $2 per hour across documented hours, worked while held at temporary status. She sat in the break room reading the statement twice, not because she doubted it, because her body still expected good news to be withdrawn. It remained in her account on Monday. News travelled through the village quickly. Some called George ruthless for removing Lenora in public. Others said he should have acted years earlier. Jade avoided village debates and stayed with tangible tasks: training checklists, supply audits, fair shift meals reinstated for all active staff, including split shifts. When the first week ended without anyone losing hours for asking questions, people started speaking more freely in corridors. Culture changed through repeated safe outcomes, not announcements. George remained in the East Wing through the quarter, as required for residency review, and the wing no longer felt abandoned. Windows were repaired, radiator lines flushed, and room status updated openly on the board. Jade still cleaned room 18 herself on Mondays by choice, partly habit, partly because the room had become the site where her life turned from managed endurance to chosen direction. George stopped pretending to be merely a guest, yet he kept the same economy of speech. Their conversations expanded in small increments. He asked about her mother, and she told him about learning stain removal at a kitchen sink when she was 10. She asked why he trusted Thomas early, and he said Thomas fixed things that did not earn him praise, which was useful data. He asked what she wanted from stewardship beyond pay security. She answered that she wanted no one at Halverton Hall to fear requesting what policy already promised. One evening in late autumn, after final rounds, Jade found George in the courtyard near the clipped yews where staff usually cut across to bus stops. Rain had cleared, leaving stone dark and air sharp. He held a small velvet box in one hand and seemed almost uncomfortable with the object, as if formal gesture required more words than he preferred. He said he had intended to wait until the quarter closed. He said waiting longer would serve no practical purpose. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, old gold, no large stone, engraved inside with the hall's date mark from an earlier generation. "Will you marry me?" he asked, "and stay here with me?" Jade heard steadiness in his voice, and beneath it, the vulnerability of someone who had spent months testing a world from inside disguise, and now chose clarity without guarantee. She stepped closer, touched the ring once, and said yes. They did not announce the engagement immediately. She requested 1 week to separate staffing changes from personal news, so no one could claim her appointment came from romance rather than record and performance. George agreed at once. When they shared the news at the next assembly, Iris documented conflict safeguards in the governance file, and Jade remained direct supervisor for housekeeping with quarterly external review, preventing private relationship from eroding workplace fairness. Winter set in. Frost edged the east wing windows each morning, and heating held across all occupied corridors, because Thomas completed overdue pipe insulation that had been deferred under Lenora's budgets. Supply orders dropped to realistic levels once false requisitions stopped. Audit sheets balanced month after month, each line carrying signatures that could withstand scrutiny. For the first time since Jade arrived in 2023, numbers and lived reality matched without effort spent hiding gaps. One afternoon, Jade entered the former linen office, now reassigned as stewardship workspace, and opened the old drawer where temporary contracts had once stacked without resolution. She found blank forms, stale carbon paper, and a label maker with dead batteries. She cleared everything, set new files in transparent order, and posted one policy summary on the wall where anyone could read it before signing. Process lost its mystery when visible. Mystery had been Lenora's instrument. Martin Hale from accounts stopped by with a corrected service record and apologized for not challenging Lenora sooner. Jade accepted the document and said, "Accountability starts when action starts." She did not grant absolution, and she did not humiliate him. People who survived coercive systems often learned silence as protection. Changing the system required a path for better choices now, or fear would simply shift targets. By early spring, House Steward felt less like title and more like routine. Morning rounds, supply checks, staffing questions, occasional guest complaints, solved through clear standards rather than personal mood. George attended operational meetings when needed and left day-to-day domestic management to her judgment. He asked concise questions, expected evidence, and accepted correction when she pointed out impractical ideas from his side of the ledgers. Respect settled into practice. The East Wing became functional again across all 18 rooms. Some remained off-market for conservation work, yet each was clean, heated, and inspectable. Room 18 kept its plain desk and repaired radiator, and the note Jade once left there stayed inside her notebook, folded soft from being opened many times. She never framed it. She kept it because private history does not need display to carry weight. When the first annual review under George's trusteeship closed, Iris presented summary findings in the same long gallery where Lenora had fallen. Compliance was stable, wage policy met, grievance routes active with documented resolution times, inventory, variance within expected limits. Staff turnover had dropped because schedules became predictable. Jade listened from the side wall, same position as during the crisis, and felt the difference between standing there in fear and standing there in authority, earned step by step. After the meeting, people filtered out in clusters, discussing weekend plans and school fees and bus timetables. Ordinary talk that had once been replaced by caution. Thomas lingered to hand Jade a maintenance request for a west stair rail and congratulated her on the review outcome with a brief grin. He left for the boiler house. Iris closed binders and told Jade she had built a defensible system, which from Iris sounded close to praise. Evening light stretched through the tall windows when Jade walked alone to the East Wing corridor and paused outside room 18. She could hear George inside turning pages, no urgency in the sound. The corridor no longer smelled of dust and neglect. It smelled of beeswax polish and warm pipes. She stood there for a moment, hand on the cart handle, and allowed herself a stillness that did not come from exhaustion. She entered with fresh linens because Monday was Monday, and routine remained the shape of her care. George looked up from the desk and smiled once, small and specific. The expression she had learned to trust before she knew his name carried a house. Jade set the folded sheets on the chair, checked radiator heat by touch, and opened the curtains to catch the last light. Nothing in the gesture needed announcement. It was the same work, seen now for what it had always been. Later, when she crossed the courtyard toward the steward's office with keys at her belt and tomorrow's roster under her arm, no one stepped aside out of pity and no one barked orders to prove rank. She belonged to the place in full measure, not as someone spared, as someone who had kept standards in a closed wing and changed the house by refusing to abandon what no one else thought worth seeing.